Imhotep Nefer Kemet. Welcome in great peace to Egypt. I am General Wendjebauendjed. You can simply call me Wendjebau. I served as a general, high dignitary, and high priest under the rule of Pasusenus I of the 21st dynasty around 1047 to 1001 BC. Even though I wasn't a royal personage, the fact that I held such significant positions permitted me to get the high honor of being buried in the royal necropolis. I have crossed the time barrier to talk to you about the army in ancient Egypt. This will include the army divisions, the defensive and offensive arms, the military costumes, the tactics and strategies during the war, and the enemies of ancient Egypt.
Once again, I have crossed the time barrier to talk to you today about the infantry, chariotry, and navy of the army in ancient Egypt. The infantry was organized into regiments that could be identified by the weapons they carried. Spearmen, bowmen, swordmen, clubmen, slingers, and other corps made up these regiments. The foot soldiers formed the backbone of the army, displaying tactical intelligence by engaging the enemy in close combat. Meanwhile, archers employed their exceptional marksmanship skills to provide a long-range advantage. The regiments were divided into battalions and companies. An army corps of 4,000 infantrymen was divided into 20 companies with between 200 and 250 soldiers apiece. Over 100,000 troops were thought to have been in the Egyptian army at the time of Ramesses II. There were also companies of Libyans, Nubians, Canaanites, and Shurdana who served in the Egyptian army. They were often described as mercenaries, but they were most likely impressed prisoners who preferred the life of a soldier instead of slavery. The late period saw the introduction of iron weaponry and mounted warriors. The infantry phalanx was the primary military formation under the Ptolemies. The pharaoh chose a commander-in-chief, who was often a prince from the royal family. The prince chose captains to carry out orders that were passed down the line of command. The commander-in-chief was tasked with choosing their commanders, who were typically lower-ranking princes of the royal dynasty during times of war. Each officer had a unique rank and a distinct command. The infantry was formed of heavy-armed troops and light-armed troops. The heavy-armed troops were furnished with a shield and spear. Some with shield and mace and others with a battle axe or poleaxe and shield. They also carried a sword, falchion, curved stick, simple mace, or hatchet. The light-armed troops had nearly the same weapons, but their defensive armor was lighter. The slingers and some others fought like archers without shields. The chariot corps forms a very large and effective portion of the army. Chariots, skillfully maneuvered and armed with both archers and spearmen, demonstrated the army's understanding of mobility and versatility in battle. Each contained 2 persons. The driver managed the reins. His hands were free for the use of the bow and other arms. The driver generally stood on the offside in order to have the whip hand free. This interfered less with the use of the bow. The archer was enabled to use the bow, while the whip was hung suspended from his wrist. The bow case was placed in an inclined position pointing forward. The Egyptian chariot had no seat. The bottom part consisted of a frame interlaced with thongs or ropes, forming a species of network, in order, by its elasticity, to render the motion of a carriage without springs easier. The chariot was made of wood, and the various steps of making the pole and other parts of a chariot needed great skills. This shows binding and preparing the woodwork of a chariot. Here are the steps of cutting leather and binding a car. The chariots will had 6 spokes, unlike that of some foreign tribes which had only 4 spokes, and these are the different parts of the chariots from different perspectives. This represents 2 charioteers on a chariot fully armed. The Egyptian chariot corps, like the infantry, were divided into light and heavy troops, both armed with bows. The light chariotry was chiefly employed in harassing the enemy with missiles, and in evolution requiring rapidity of movement. These were also supplied with weapons adapted to close combat, such as the sword, club, and javelin, but they had neither spear nor shield. The heavy chariotry was called upon to break through opposing masses of infantry. This was after having galled them during their advance with a heavy shower of arrows. To enable them to charge with greater security, they were furnished with a shield, which was not required for the other mounted archers, and a long spear was substituted on these occasions for the missiles they had previously employed. The light-armed chariot corps were also supplied with weapons adapted to close combat, such as the sword, club, and javelin, but no spear nor shield. When a hero encountered a hostile chief, he sometimes dismounted from his car, and substituted for his bow and quiver the spear, battle-axe, or falchion, and clashed with him hand to hand. The wounded adversary, incapable of further resistance, and those who laid down their arms and yielded to the Egyptians were taken to the back lines under escort and treated as prisoners of war. After the termination of the conflict, the king would demonstrate the hand of the slain that were counted before him. Everything was counted and registered.
There were two different types of ships in ancient Egypt, the reed boat and the vessel made from large wooden planks. The Nile River was the only highway of ancient Egypt that connected all parts of the country along the Great River. Before the New Kingdom, the Egyptian military was mainly aquatic, and the high ranks were composed of elite middle-class Egyptians. Egyptian troops were transported by naval vessels as early as the late Old Kingdom. The naval ship was made from large wooden planks. The planked ships created the naval fleet and gave it its fierce reputation. Each boat had a designated section, generally under the main deck, where the rowers would sit. The steering oar was operated by one man. It was less raised at the head and stern. A lion's head was fixed on the prow of the warship. On each side, throughout the whole length of the vessel, a wooden bulwark rising considerably above the gunwale sheltered the rowers, who sat behind it, from the missiles of the enemy. The handles of the oars were passing through an aperture at the lower part. The soldiers of the war galley were part of the military class, a certain number of whom were specially trained for the sea. The Egyptians never had a specific marine unit, but rather it was known that anyone on board was equally capable of both maintaining the ship, rowing, and fighting at the same time. The arms and dress of the Navy soldiers were the same as those of the heavy infantry and archers of the army. The quilted helmet of the rowers shows they also were part of the same corps. Besides the archers in the raised poop and forecastle, a body of slingers was stationed in the tops, where they could with more facility manage that weapon and employ it with effect on the enemy. On advancing to engage a hostile fleet, the sail was used till they came within a certain distance. When the signal or order having been given clear for action, the sail was reefed using ropes running in pulleys, or loops, upon the yard. The ends of these ropes, which were usually 4 in number, divided the sail as it rose into 5 folds. So, the ends of the ropes descended and were attached to the lower part of the mast, to be readily worked, when the sail required to be pulled up at a moment's notice, in a storm. Having prepared for the attack, the rowers plied their oars. The head was directed towards an enemy's vessel, and showers of missiles were thrown from the forecastle and tops as they advanced. It was of great importance to strike their opponent on the side. When the steersman, by a skillful maneuver, could succeed in this, the shock was so great that they sank it, or obtained a considerable advantage by crippling the oars. The length of the warship could reach up to 40 meters, with 20 oars on each side. Here, the Egyptian marines on board the ships were attempting to board the vessels of the sea peoples. Upon boarding them, most of the crew on the Egyptian ships would arm themselves and fight in close-quarter combat through the use of spears, shields, and battle axes. Some of the enemy's ships were capsized. The Egyptians would board other ships using the most common method of using grappling hooks to pull in a ship after peppering them with arrows and slingshots. The enemy with their tall ships all were falling into the water and pierced by the arrows that were being fired from the Egyptian ships. The Egyptian Navy continued to serve the military as a transportation mechanism, an amphibious force, and at the same time an aggressive force with which to wage war. This was a spotlight on the army forces in ancient Egypt. The enemies of ancient Egypt will be covered in detail in the upcoming episode, as well as the meaning of the 9 bows, which were frequently mentioned in our monuments. So long.
Make sure to tune into my next videos. If you have any thoughts or questions, add them to your comments. Kindly press the like, share and subscribe buttons. I'm Farag al-Sharabasi, and see you in the next episodes. Thank you.